you're also very modest because the European Commission is the biggest funder of research and monitoring in our region, and WHO really need these research results for our policy making, because we have to be evidence-based.
Oturumun dördüncü konuşmacısı açıkçası çok biyografisinden etkilendiğimi ifade etmek istediğim bir konuşmacımız Peter Anderson. Newcastle Üniversitesi'nden geliyor, ancak sadece Newcastle Üniversitesi'nde değil, Maastricht Üniversitesi'nde de çalışıyor. Uluslararası alkol ve bağımlılık uzmanı. Avrupa Bölge Ofisi'nde Dünya Sağlık Örgütü'nün çok uzun yıllarca çalışmış. Halihazırda 20 milyon euroluk 2 tane alkol politikaları ile alakalı çalışmanın da proje sorumlusu olarak çalışıyor. 150'nin üzerinde yayını, 15'in üzerinde kitabı var. Kendisini dinlemekten keyif alacağımızı ümit ediyorum. Dr. Peter Anderson. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much to the Green Crescent Society for inviting me to talk about the global governance of alcohol. Actually, the last time I was formally in this beautiful city was in 1997 at the WHO European Regional Committee meeting, where I presented the second action plan for a tobacco-free Europe at a time of the preparation of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. At that time, only 16 years ago, I have to confess that I did not make a good start with your great carrier, Turkish Airlines. These were the days when you could not check in online. I was allocated a smoking seat as there were no non-smoking seats left. Not only that, but my smoking seat was widely covered in cigarette ash. And this was perhaps not the best situation to be put in for a WHO regional advisor on tobacco. But obviously it was culturally very normal, as when I asked the cabin attendants to clean my seat, they replied that I should not be worried about ash on my seat and I should just sit down. Pushed on by my WHO colleagues, and like all good advocates, I stood my ground and declined to sit down until my seat was cleaned. After much heated argument, and I'm afraid a little delay in the plane, the head of the cabin came to clean my seat. This was only 16 years ago, and what a pleasure it is now to fly smoke-free, and how appealing it is to drive from the airport free from cigarette advertisements. My point is that big cultural changes can occur in short time periods, and congratulations to the Turkish government for enacting enabling legislation that makes healthier choices easier choices for its citizens. In my presentation, I will lay out 6 reasons why alcohol, the only major psychoactive drug of abuse not covered by a legally binding global agreement, should be the subject of global governance architecture, and I shall consider 3 options for that architecture. I will conclude that we need a legally binding protocol on commercial communications as the first step towards a comprehensive framework convention on alcohol, and that one or more countries should, as they have done with tobacco, be brave enough to open discussion to move a protocol forward. The first of my 6 reasons is the scope of the global damage. In 2010, alcohol was the world's 5th most important risk factor for ill health and premature death, after high blood pressure, tobacco, household air pollution from solid fuels, and a diet low in fruits, moving up from 8th ranking in 1990. We know that this is an underestimate, as it does not include all alcohol use disorders, and it does not include all of alcohol's impact on infectious diseases. It also does not include all of alcohol's harm to people other than the drinker, which essentially doubles the social costs due to alcohol, currently some 2% or so of GDP, a large part of which is due to lost productivity. The second of my 6 reasons is that the global damage due to alcohol is substantial over most of the world. This is despite the fact that 3 out of 5 of the world's adults do not currently drink alcohol, and that many people live in parts of the world in which drinking alcohol is not the norm and in which the use of alcohol is not considered as part of daily life. The scope of the damage is going to get worse. This is simply due to economic growth in large parts of Africa and Asia, up to quite high levels as GDP grows, so levels of abstaining from the use of alcohol falls. This is, of course, compounded by marketing practices of alcohol producers that in many jurisdictions in the world are largely out of control. The third of my 6 reasons is that alcohol damage transcends national borders. Alcohol is an important commodity in international trade, and smuggling and informal cross-border trade is practiced all across the world, with illegal trade routes well identified. It is not just the product and the damage that it carries that crosses borders, but all the forms of commercial communications, and particularly those through electronic and social media. The fourth of my 6 reasons is that countries cannot manage this problem alone. This is not just a matter of illegal trade or communication by digital media, but also a principle of comity between nations, in which countries should honor and support existing evidence-based alcohol control policies of other countries, such as those that relate to pricing, advertising, and availability. The fifth of my 6 reasons is that there is a lack of any suitable existing convention or other international legal agreement for alcohol. This is not because alcohol is any different from or is a special substance compared with tobacco or illicit drugs. It is simply because at a global level it has not happened yet. The first 4 reasons that I've mentioned are the very same 4 reasons that are used to justify the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. In addition, a psychotropic substance, as is alcohol, may be scheduled under the 1971 Drugs Convention if a WHO expert committee finds that the substance has the capacity to produce a state of dependence and impairs central nervous system functions, or produces similar abuse and ill effects as a substance already compared by the Convention, and that there is sufficient evidence that the substance is likely to be abused so as to constitute a public health and social problem warranting the place of the substance under international control. By these criteria, it would be difficult for an expert committee not to recommend alcohol for scheduling under the Convention. And my 6th of the 6 reasons is that there is a chance that a push for an international convention would succeed. In other words, that the time is ripe. In this sense, there is a ripening, and there is certainly an opportunity to start a formal discussion which has already been seeded in a range of WHO publications, including the report of the 2006 Expert Committee and the report of the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, and even in some of the words of the WHO Global Strategy itself. Ripening can be illustrated by 4 reasons. First, there is a growing backlash against the behavior of the alcohol industry, who are fast positioning themselves as the next tobacco industry. Second, increasingly alcohol is recognized as a problem of the middle-aged and the middle class, a problem to many of us in the audience, and we all need help for it. Third, classified as a carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the world's reference body on cancer, it is recognized that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. Further, the message we developed for the 1995 Paris Ministerial Conference, less is better, stands and has increasing salience. And fourth, countries are getting more worried and more countries are asking for more action. Having mentioned 6 reasons, I would now like to consider 3 global governance options. The first option is to maintain the status quo. There is a global strategy and there is an NCD framework with meaningful targets and indicators for alcohol. But there are problems. First, a strategy, as opposed to a legal instrument, does not facilitate the institutional, political, financial, or civil society support that have been mobilized in the context of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Second, notwithstanding the existing commitment, dedication, and hard work of the WHO Secretariat, compared with tobacco, let alone the machinery around the illicit drugs conventions, there are simply not the needed resources available to match the scale of the global damage. Third, the alcohol industry itself aligns itself to a remarkable degree to the global strategy. Some commentators have argued that this means that in many jurisdictions, the alcohol industry is not excluded from the policy arena, and that they are using the space and time given to them to normalize the use of alcohol. And fourth, the terminology of the global strategy can be counterintuitive and confusing to those countries whose policies aim to support non-drinkers to maintain their non-drinking behavior. The second of my three options is a framework convention on alcohol control, built and developed on the experience gained from the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, rather than directly modeled or copied from it. A legally binding convention could provide trade liberalization that is both sustainable in relation to alcohol and respects the Comity of Nations. It would provide the needed governance architecture, resources, and institutional support to further policy development at the country level, particularly in low and middle income countries. There are different roads to take with building such architecture. Instead of routing from convention to protocol, as has been done with tobacco, one could route protocol to convention and start with a protocol on commercial communications. The third of my three options is to schedule alcohol within the 1971 Convention on Narcotic Drugs. It could, though, only be reasonably applied to alcohol if alcohol can be exempt from Articles 5 and 9 of the Convention, which essentially state that use and possession of the substance is to be limited to medical and scientific purposes. There may be substantial obstacles to reframing this particular wording that would counter the scheduling of alcohol within the 1971 Convention, but it is not impossible. It is a common experience in public health policy, as also in alcohol policy, that the public discourse and debate about adopting a policy is as important in changing behavior, at least initially, as the legal instruments which are the results of the debate. And though the explicit justification for an international convention is the need for international action about trade and problems which cross boundaries, the strongest effects of such conventions may be at national and subnational levels, and this can be an implicit reason for them. Measures in domestic markets that can be stated in terms of encouragement rather than requirement can lead to new norms and practices, not only for international trade, but also for national and subnational legislation and regulation. It is a matter of political and public, as well as expert opinion, whether it is more reasonable to frame alcohol like tobacco or more reasonable to frame alcohol like other psychotropic substances dealt by the drug conventions. The call from parts of the Americas to open discussions of the drug conventions may contribute leaning in one direction. On the other hand, most public health bodies align actions on alcohol, largely but not exclusively a legal substance, in the similar frame as tobacco. This might argue for an approach for a framework convention on alcohol control. However, there might be advantage in traveling a new route and calling for the development of a protocol on commercial communications as the first step. So, in conclusion, the scope and extent and nature of the global damage by alcohol, a psychoactive drug of abuse, calls for effective global architecture. A legally binding agreement provides the institutional arrangements that voluntary actions seem not to be able to do. In this sense, a global legal protocol that curbs commercial communications could be a new step forward. One or a handful of brave countries that have good experience in negotiating and implementing legal binding public health agreements could take one or more steps to start a formal discussion on a legally binding agreement for alcohol. I have never smoked, but as a parent, I am very relieved that my children can grow up in an environment where the norm is no longer one of smoking. However, I do drink alcohol, and like many of my middle-aged colleagues in similar professional groups, for sure, I drink more than is good for my health. I know that it is my choice and my responsibility to drink less, but as with all lifestyle choices, how much easier it is to make healthy choices when the environment is conducive so to do, and how much more important this is for all of my friends and colleagues who, whilst living in environments in which drinking alcohol is not the normal behaviour, yet are under increasing pressure to drink and to drink more than perhaps they would like to. In ending with this personal reflection, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity for me to give this presentation, and I'd like to thank you all for the understanding in listening to it.